being in it, actually, it's the first time I'm coming. This is a realization of the Greens, where we were in the regional government here for 10 years. In Brussels, we had expectedly the environmental competence, and we established the Brussels Agency for the Environment here in this building, which is the largest passive building in Brussels, so with a very nice auditorium, as you can see. So this is one of the proud achievements of Ecolo and Groen here under the ministership of Evelien Uiterbroek, who will chair the final session this afternoon. I need to excuse also my friend Reinhard Bütikofer. He was supposed to chair this session, but he fell ill actually last weekend and is really not in a position to come and chair. So we decided to do an event on the economy. Why the economy? Well, because it's the economy, stupid. You know that Greens have a reputation for being economically illiterate. And that sticks with us, despite our long-lasting efforts to assert our credentials on it. And actually, well, having spent 22 years in the real economy and then now 7 years in the European Parliament, I must say that when it comes to economic illiteracy, I find that the mainstream parties are probably the most illiterate of all. And I'm serious. I'm serious because, well, most of the professional politicians who are populating the finance ministries and the parliaments and the governments and the central banks usually have only seen the real economy from a distance, usually at the New Year cocktail of the multinational that invites them or in the restaurant, but they never have really worked there. And what they know about the economy, they are taught by economists. But the species of economists that Joan Martinez belongs to is, say, a rare species, right? Mm. This is not really the mainstream.
But it's growing.
Yeah, it's growing, of course. But I must say that we have had serious threats to biodiversity in the economics profession. And I'm an engineer, I'm not an economist, and I like to say that there's two major differences between engineers and mainstream economists. On the one hand, mainstream economists ignore thermodynamics. And that's an important part of physics that deals with energy. And they have no clue, really no clue, and they are not interested, because if they would really get into the thing, they would realize that what they've built as a theory is just that, a theory. And the second difference is that unlike engineers, mainstream economists believe in the miracles of technology, while engineers, having, well, spent time and energy into technology, know pretty well the limits of technology. You know, when an economist is faced with a conundrum, his usual response is, well, technology will save us. Well, and that was just a conversation I had with Jean-Claude Trichet, former head of the ECB. I told him, well, and it was a private conversation, so we were discussing his 2% inflation objective, and I said, just imagine that energy prices skyrocket because of either scarcity or we can't burn what's beneath the ground, and how do you deal with that? And his answer was, nice of you, the Greens, to think about these limits, but I have faith in the genius of mankind, and I believe so. I have faith, and I believe that nuclear fusion will rescue us. And I told him, listen, I graduated more than 30 years ago, and when I graduated as an engineer, or teachers in nuclear physics were telling us, well, a nuclear fusion reactor is, well, envisageable 50 years from now. And today, they say exactly the same thing. So here we have the top central banker in Europe resorting to a faith not to have to deal with reality. And that, to me, is typical. Now, that said, economy of, by, and for the people. Yeah, of course. I mean, why would we have an economy? You would think that this is common sense. Well, if you read Piketty, if you read Atkinson, you realize that if the economy is working, it is not really for everyone. It works for a decreasing minority of a global population, so it's certainly not for the people. And the buy is interesting because how is it that, well, you have these increasing inequalities and increasing poverty on our continent? Well, because the system is built on the exploitation of two elements. One, the people, well, the bulk of the people, and two, the resources of this planet. So that's the system. Fairly simple, exploit to the max the people and the planet so as to maximize short-term profit for the happy few. And that's basically the idea. By the way, even Pope Francis realizes that, and for the first time we have an anti-capitalist text coming out of the Vatican, which is not really usual. So that's a good development. So obviously, we need to put the economy back to the service of the people, and there should be a hierarchy, you know. It's about the people, so normally finance should serve the economy and the economy should serve people. Now it's the other way around. So that's what we need to transform. So how are we going to proceed? What's our program? Yesterday we started, for those of you who were there, with exposés from people in charge at regional level, say sub-national level, so let's say local experiences, how can we progress the transition of our economies. This morning, with the first plenary, we are going to take a bit of altitude and look at the wider implications of putting the economy back in normal tracks, that is, at the service of the people, respecting the biophysical limits of this small spaceship called Earth. And that is important because if we deny the broader implications, then we may make the wrong choices on the ground. So we need to keep both dimensions. And I would say that if you want to have change, you need bottom-up change, new initiatives from the ground, but you also need to change the structures. If we currently are exploiting the planet and the people to the max, is because the structures have been built like that, and if you don't touch them, well, probably you will keep having the same results. So first step, we will take a few steps back. We'll try to take a helicopter or maybe a spaceship view of the challenges ahead. And then in the second phase, we are going to split in four smaller groups, and that depends really on your interest, where we will look at four different angles. Well, there's many more, but four different angles. The youth angle, because, well, we know that quite a lot of energy to kickstart this transformation is coming from the youngest amongst us, but also the youngest amongst us are also often the victim of the system. Well, you hear that expression of a lost generation, and this is not totally undeserved. Second aspect, second possibility, if you're interested in how the local economy can be boosted by local currencies, that's the second angle we are going to take. The third angle will be about green innovation spurring the transformation or not. We will discuss that. And the fourth aspect will be about labor protection. If our system is to be deeply transformed, how do we organize social protection in a world where the dominant paradigm is no longer the Fordist industrial-based model? Now, there you need to choose. You can go to one of the four workshops, but you will have a second chance in the sense that after lunch, we will then have a World Cafe where all the speakers of all the workshops will be available, and if you really wanted to engage with some people in other workshops, that will be your chance. So you will be free to circulate and talk with one another and with the speakers of all four workshops. And then we will reconvene at 3 for a final plenary where what we will focus on is actual accomplishments of Greens at various levels of power across Europe, showing that as François Hollande said, and well, you will forgive me for quoting him, le changement, c'est maintenant. In other terms, the transformation has started. It is not just that we are looking towards the future. Actually, change is already happening now. And for those of you who have seen the movie Demain, there's a series of examples of people enacting change now. And that should give us heart to continue, because it's true that, again, when you take the helicopter view, you really feel that the dominant paradigm is still dominant. And its dominance does not seem to be really challenged. So that will be the concluding plenary. So plenary this morning, first half of the morning, workshops, second half, World Café, final plenary. That's how we are going to work. Now, let me introduce you Joan Martinez-Alier, an economist.
A lapsed economist.
Yeah, a lapsed economist. An economist who did pay interest to thermodynamics. And you can consider him as one of the fathers of ecological economics. So it's not about green growth, it's about questioning the paradigm, the very paradigm on which our societies have been built the last few centuries. And of course, it's a growing but still minority group of economists, but he's really a driving force. You will see that he's got quite a lot of energy, and he's coming from Barcelona, from La Autónoma, which can be seen as one of the strongholds of alternative thinking in economics. So I don't know whether I can already say that, because nothing has been decided yet. But since we last met in Budapest at the last degrowth conference in, what was it, September? Well, yeah, September. They've just motivated me to host the next one in Brussels. I don't know whether we are going to be successful, but there will be one in 2018, and I really want to make a bid to have it here in this city. And I would like to use the opportunity to confront, to an extent, Brussels is the Vatican of the pensée unique, of the mainstream thinking. And bringing controversy into the Vatican is the thing that we need to do. So I would just relish it. I don't know whether it's going to happen, but count on me to try hard to make it happen. Joan, without further ado, up to you. Maybe I will sit there. Sorry.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. And I know it's Saturday morning, so many people are probably asleep still. Not here, but I mean outside here. But thank you for inviting me and for giving me freedom to talk about what I have been thinking for 30 years at least, or 35 years. And I am like a second generation ecological economist, because before us there was George Reagan, Kenneth Boulding. These were also lapsed economists, economists who started thinking about thermodynamics and the environment. And also from ecology, people like Howard Odum and other people already in the 70s started to say that ecology should not only worry about plants and animals and ecosystems without humans, but about the real world today, which now we call it the Anthropocene, isn't it? So the world is full of people, for too many people perhaps, and ecologists had to study also human ecology. So from the convergence between human ecology and some dissident economists like Herman Daly and the ones I mentioned before, ecological economics was born as a journal, as a society. And now there is very few, but there are already some chairs, some university departments on ecological economics. Ecological economics is not a branch of economics, it's rather like an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary field of knowledge incorporating economics and ecology and some sociology and some politics and geography and so on. And born exactly in 86, 87, I wrote a book with that title, which was a kind of history of ecological economics before it existed, and it was published in fact in Catalan in 84, and then in English and Japanese and other languages from 87 onwards. So my book was the first with that title, but not the last. There are many books now with ecological economics in the title. So I wanted to start with a strong attack on the Brussels Vatican. Then I talk later about the Rome Vatican. But because the circular economy is something which is used here very much, but also in Peking. In China, the Communist Party has a slogan that the economy should be circular. Well, very good idea, but it's not the reality at all. So this is a bit difficult to read quickly, but I'm going to summarize. There is a new article, but many people are working on this in the field of study which is called industrial ecology. And this article from a few months ago had some figures, and the figures show that in 2005, the degree of circularity of the economy was about 6%. So from 6% to 100%, there is a lot to go. And in fact, we cannot go to 100% or 50% or 30% in an industrial economy, because the industrial economy for the last 200 years has been based on the fossil fuels. Of course, we have to reduce the amount of fossil fuels being burned, but this is not happening, isn't it? Yeah, and in fact, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going up by about 1 or 2 parts per million every year. We are now at 403 parts per million. Of course, it's not like this. It varies a little bit depending on the place in the globe, but this is the Mauna Loa, Hawaii measurement. So, and it's been going up. When I started to teach ecological economics in the early 90s, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 360 parts per million. So I still have a few years to go. So when I go when I die or go into reincarnation, I am thinking about it. Will be probably, I don't know, 410 parts per million or 15, depending how long I live. And this is something that we are not stopping at all. Why? Because of the burning of fossil fuels. When you burn fossil fuels, of course, the energy cannot be recycled. And the materials, only a small percentage of the materials are recycled. Don't think of domestic waste, which is easy, but think of industrial waste. It's very difficult, or what goes into stocks. Well, this building is going to last, I hope, for a very long time, but at the end, what is going to happen with the materials? Are they going to be recycled? Are they going to go to dump somewhere? So the economy is circular at this time, and the figures are here only to the extent of, say, 5, 6, 7%. In Europe, a little bit more, but this is the world average. And of course, many new industrial countries is lower than this. So the circular economy is really wishful thinking, because the industrial economy, as I have explained now, is entropic, which is that entropic means that the energy dissipates. And the materials don't dissipate because they are here all the time in the planet, but they become unusable or very difficult to use them again unless we put a lot of time, labor, and energy into the recycling. So, and we don't only exhaust the stocks of fossil fuels, we also spoil what is called the funds. For instance, a fishery is something that is totally viable forever, forever is a long time, but I mean, the sun is still going to work for about 4 billion or 4.5 billion years. We are more or less halfway in the life of the sun and the our planetary system. So it goes beyond what I'm able to discuss. But so fisheries or forest, through forest, or the soil is a fund which can give services and products forever if we take care of them. But we are even exhausting the funds. the funds, this fund, is an old term from economics, from Kene, from the fund from the 18th century. We are exhausting them, we're exhausting the fertility of the soil, we're exhausting some fisheries, and we are turning many forests into either desert or tree plantations, which are not real forests. Because the economy is entropic, we have to go and fetch new resources all the time. I mean the industrial system, whether it's in China, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Japan, whether it's in some parts in the south also. The industrial system goes all the time to the commodity frontiers. For instance, now we are taking every day about 95 million barrels of oil per day, 95. So if OPEC is now successful, we'll reduce to 93, 94, but somebody else will increase if there is demand. So tomorrow, again, doesn't matter, well, perhaps on Sunday they stop, but I mean on Monday will be again 95 million barrels, and on Tuesday and on Wednesday, because these barrels of oil are going to be burned. Some of it goes into plastic, but most of them goes into energy to move things or to burn as fuel. And the same thing with gas, the same thing with coal. So we go, and where are these commodity extraction frontiers? Well, some of them are still here. Belgium was a famous place, or Wallonie, isn't it, for coal mining. But people don't like this for many good reasons, isn't it? Local reasons and climate change reasons. And in Germany, there is this strong movement now, or more or less green movement of Ende Gelände, isn't it? Of not leaving the lignite in the soil. But so where are the real commodity frontiers for coal? Well, they are in India, they are in China, and Australia, in Colombia, in South Africa. And for gas, gas, sometimes they are very near here because of fracking, and people complain. They complain in Sussex, but they also complain in Patagonia, and they complain in the Cape, in South Africa, against fracking. A few years ago, the Secretary General of NATO, which is not very far from here, who was called Rasmussen, he went to London in Chatham House, and he said, Chatham House has rules that journalists cannot quote what he said, but after the conference, he said, the opposition to fracking in Europe, including in the UK, is being funded by Putin, because Putin wants to send the Russian gas and have a geopolitical use of the gas, which I found funny to think that ladies in Sussex are being funded by the Putin, isn't it, by Russia. But if you go to other places, to Bolivia, for instance, the government will say anti-fracking people or anti-oil people or anti-mining people are being funded by the CIA, isn't it? So the Greens are being funded by some obscure forces always, but it's not like this. People complain because if they are living at the commodity frontiers, they want to preserve their livelihood, their landscape, their water, sometimes because of sheer need. They live from the local resources. So this I already explained. And the last point is what I want to insist upon, because of this march towards the commodity frontiers, and also because of the waste disposal, whether it's nuclear waste disposal or whether it's CO2, which is also a problem of waste disposal, because CO2 is very good for the plants in the spring, isn't it? But we are producing too much of it, and therefore there is a problem where to put it, in the oceans, and then you have ocean acidification in the atmosphere, and then you have an excessive amount, and you have climate change. So the plants, the photosynthesis, the terrestrial photosynthesis is not enough to absorb the carbon dioxide, which is the biggest waste disposal conflict we have. But then there are, of course, local waste disposal conflicts, and people say, well, let's go for incineration. And then some local people will say incineration is potentially dangerous because of dioxin or because of furans, and people have been learning these new words, isn't it? So ecological distribution conflicts, they are partly economic and social and ethnic sometimes, and gender, but they are different. They are about the ecology, about the oil, gas, bauxite, iron ore, palm oil, sugarcane for ethanol, so biomass mining, or they are about waste disposal or about transport sometimes, isn't it? Like the Tibnis conflict in Bolivia about the road going into the Amazon, so it's against a road. Or in Europe, the conflicts or the TAF between Torino and Milan, and Torino and Lyon, or in Nantes, isn't it? Which I don't know what is happening, but something is about to happen very soon, I think. And in France, they have invented this new word, sadist, which I like very much, with a Z, not with an S, sadist, which means zone à défendre, no? Which is a joke on an administrative word, which was zone d'aménagement différé. And in Nantes, against the airport, is the same thing. People are complaining against this kind of grand projet inutile imposé, as somebody invented these words, these great projects for enormous transport infrastructures which are probably not going to be used. Right now in Madrid, for instance, they have like several motorways which are now, they have they were concession to some companies. Now the government has to buy them because there are not enough cars after the economic crisis to go there. It's like a bad joke, isn't it? So when people complain, they're complaining because the economy, when it grows really, or when it goes fictitiously, because an expectation of growth, fortunately, people complain. And I think that these complaints are a big help to move towards a more or less unsustainable economy. And this is, I have already explained what it means. And because of this, and because of actually European money for research, we have been doing for the last 3 or 4 years already, and we are now continuing this environmental justice atlas, which is the same thing as environmental conflicts atlas. We are now stuck for a few weeks at this number but now very soon we are going to get new people working on this, and we are going to reach, I hope, like 3,000 cases around the world by the end of 2019, in 3 years. It's a very laborious process. We fill in like database forms. One can do statistical analysis, one can do comparative analysis, one can do books, articles, newspapers like it sometimes. And as you see, there are some empty spaces in the world, which is not because there are no conflicts, because we have not been able yet to get going in China, for instance, as we are now going to do. And of course, if there are no people, like in Australia, or few people, you have less conflicts. And the conflicts are coded in this atlas, depending on so yellow, which you are not seeing very well, isn't it? But yellow means nuclear, and black means mining, and red means fossil fuels, and so on. So we have like 10 main categories. And blue means dams, which are going on everywhere too rapidly again. If one had here a mouse and an internet, but one could go into these cases, and this is going to be available, I hope, to all of you in the proceedings of this conference. You can have this in 1 hour or whatever, in 10 minutes after I stop speaking. I don't know whether it's a web page. You are quite welcome to put in the web page. And if you go there in internet, you will find some cases which we put very recently. And I was so much involved in these cases that I put them for this talk. But also because I think they are very relevant for the history of the European Greens and the German Greens mainly. So here there was a conflict in Kalkar, which has now become an amusement park. That's what we call it, a bad joke. Kalkar was going to be a sodium moderated reactor for processing, for producing plutonium basically. And Grimalville was the same thing in France. It was stopped. Both were stopped. Plogoff in Brittany was stopped in 79. But before, the debate was before 3 Mile Island. And it was a small village, a kind of Asterix kind of thing in Brittany, with people complaining against this monster that did not, which was like 1,000 megawatts power station. I scarcely remember this myself, and many of these you were not born yet in 71, isn't it, or 72, 73. But it is the history, not the prehistory, the real history of the green movement in some parts of Europe at least. Brockdorf, which went through, the opposition lost, and Wil in Germany, in Baden, in the border with France, is a very interesting case because they stopped this nuclear power station, and Joachim Spangenberg and other people have explained to me that, thank you, that the German word Energiewende, which is now used, because there is a real Energiewende in Germany now, a change in the energy system, I think because nuclear power is going to be off, and there is this strong movement for renewable energies. This was first used in this place, in Wil, which was a movement of Bürgerinitiative and some scientists complaining, already protesting, already alarming the people about nuclear power. And Wackersdorf is another example, I think, was also stopped. And one could go this in other countries and in other continents, also in the States, for instance, how the Greens, to a large extent, were born, well, from Nietzsche, conservancy, and so on, but also from the anti-nuclear movements of the 70s and 80s. And this is the truth, I would say. This is a very plausible historical interpretation. So as a parliamentary party, the German Greens went to parliament, I think, in 1980 or 81, and with people like Petra Kelly and so on, and Rudi Dutschke, and coming from 68, of course, some of them, but it was the movement not organized by any political party, but by people, or sometimes by extreme left political parties, but mainly also the churches and the Bürgerinitiativen, isn't it? The civil society movements. So, again, this kind of early ecological distribution conflicts, because if people in Plogoff, a little village in Brittany, were complaining against a nuclear power station, they were not asking for compensation. They said, we don't want this here, it's too big for us. We are a fishing village, we're all right as we are. We don't want even the topic. The question is not compensation for externalities, as economists like to do, to bring everything into the economic language, isn't it? And people refuse. They use other valuation languages. They can say, perhaps not in Brittany, but in other places, that a landscape is sacred, or a lake is sacred, or a mountain is sacred in their own culture. Or they can say it has no price, that is something that is so important for the local culture or landscape, even before not being sacred. It's like you were explaining this tour and taxi building, isn't it? So some people in Brussels said, we want to preserve this, and we are not going to sell it to anybody for compensation, even if they pay us, I don't know how many, 100 euros per inhabitant of Brussels. Well, better not to make the experiment, but of asking what would be the compensation. But some people would say, you cannot sell anything, everything. Cultural monuments are not for languages are not for selling. What is the worth of speaking Flemish or Catalan, which are very inconvenient languages, small languages? I mean, Catalan, for instance, and say, why do you, or Basque, why do you insist in speaking this thing? It's very uneconomic, isn't it? Well, people say it's not a question of economic, it's a question of culture. So these attempts by the economists to use only the economic language is something that is powerful because the economists are powerful, because business is powerful. I think that's the reason. But it's not convincing intellectually. And some people are not convinced. Many people are not convinced in practice. Because, for instance, the Cuna in Panama, they have noticed they think that the sea level, the Kuna are indigenous people speaking their own languages still after 500 years in the coast of Panama, living in little islands along the coast. It has become like a tourist place also. But the sea level is rising, or they think it's going to raise. If there's a hurricane, even more, but this kind of thing. And therefore they say, well, what is happening here? You have to move us somewhere else, or you should arrange climate change, which is not going to happen. So it's an ecological distribution conflict. And this kind of unfair ecological distribution, as a German economist, well, German, I mean, he went to the States in 1933, but he was born in Königsberg. Carl Wilhelm Kapp, in a book already from 1950, said that the industrial capitalist system was a system of cost shifting. So it's not occasional externalities that we're going to bring into market valuation by some asking people. This is called contingent valuation, or valuation in money terms using some methods by economists. The system is a system of cost shifting. And this I'm going to try to prove by moving into this issue of unburnable fuels. So these are other cases, which I have no time to explain, of people complaining in some parts of the world against, in these three cases, coal mining. The Fulani in South Africa, in northeast South Africa, in a place called Fulani, who are saying, in alliance with some environmentalists, because there are rhinos and other animals there, against an open cast big coal mine, saying we don't want coal mining because of our local water and food and land. We don't want coal mining. And we also know that coal mining at the end is going to produce more carbon dioxide because the coal is going to be burned, isn't it? The other case is the same thing in India. So it's not only in Germany or in the States with this Blockadia or these Sioux people now in Dakota complaining against a pipeline and using both climate change arguments and local arguments and indigenous territorial rights arguments. In India, in a place called Sompeta, the same thing is happening. People against a coal power station and a mine and saying we don't want this because of climate change and because of our local. And of course in Germany, I already mentioned Ende Gelände, which I saw that some people knew what it was, but it means these movements of invading, occupying symbolically for a few days or hours, lignite mines near Cologne or in Lusatia, near, how do you call this in German, near Berlin, Launitz. Last year, occupying these places and stopping the mines, in a kind of direct action demonstration against this. Or Blockadia, as I mentioned. All these, the ideas of leaving fossil fuels in the ground, and the ideas of disinvestment, which I see here, that you are going to discuss this, and I think it's a very good discussion, they do not come from 2 or 3 years ago. They come from at least 10 years ago, and they were invented in Nigeria, and they were invented in Ecuador. In Nigeria, because of the very obvious presence of Shell with the Nigerian dictatorship in the 90s, killing people, many people who were demonstrating, and at the end killing, after a trial, Ken Saro-Wiwa and another Ogoni leaders. So the remaining Ogoni leaders said, we want to leave the oil in the soil. Leave the oil in the soil, and later they have said, leave the coal in the hole, leave the grass under the grass, in this kind of slogans of a movement, because movements invent slogans, isn't it? And so when there are slogans, it's probably a movement or an attempt to have a movement behind this. So oil in the soil comes from Nigeria and then comes from Ecuador because of Texaco in the Amazonia of Ecuador. They got together, they founded a network called Oil Watch, and from Kyoto, 1990, they said, we want a moratorium of extraction of oil in places in which the environment is very important and in which there are indigenous people and people can be, and this is exactly the Yasuni idea, which failed for a while, but I think it has some future still. So leave unburnable fuels in the soil. We call them unburnable because of, Because of this, there is also another idea from the South, which is the ecological debt. And my question is why European Greens have left this notion aside. Since you are European left, you have a chance to take it in again. Because although in the COP21 in Paris, very explicitly, it was left aside because of the pressure from the US and the agreement of the European governments, and all the governments agreed to leave the notion of liability aside. So read the second paragraph. In Article 52 says that although the Article 8 talks about loss and damage of people being damaged by climate change, this does not involve or provide a basis for any liability. So liability means that you can go to court and claim damages, or perhaps you could even go to criminal court in The Hague, as it seems that might happen in future. But I'm talking about civil court for damages. So no liability. If you like, we feel very guilty or we feel very bad, we ask for forgiveness, all this kind of rhetoric can go, but not liability. Liability was excluded. And it's interesting because I see that the Pope is mentioned in the call for this conference, and many people now are talking about this encyclical, and not because the theology, I think, but because of the fact that it's so well written about environmental issues, and of course coming from a Pope which is from Buenos Aires, and influenced by liberation theology and discussions in Latin America. And if you go to Laudato Si and look at Articles 51 and 52, you will see that he copied. I know that encyclicals are written by popes, and popes are inspired by the Holy Ghost, isn't it? But apart from the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Ghost also operated before through people in South America. I know them. I mean, this I could have written myself. And with Acción Ecológica and other people, it's exactly like this, or Leonardo Boff also, in which they say there is a debt. There is not just a debt as a kind of lyrical expression. There is a real debt that the North has to the South because of climate change or because of the... And the word disproportionate here is very interesting because it has been used by the environmental justice movement in the US since the 1980s, the disproportionate damage in areas of Black population, Hispanic population, Indian population, this word disproportionate, which implied discrimination, they say. So I have like 3 or 4 minutes. So, and I have still something I want to say. Because of all this, one could move, I think, toward a view that we should move towards prosperity without growth. Or even if you want to be more extreme and have a greater debate about a little bit of degrowth and then a steady state economy, instead of this slogan, which is very similar to the circular economy, that we're going to have green capitalist growth. And here, a little bit of history of ideas. The word décroissance was used first by André Gorz, we think, that's what we have found in 1872, in a meeting in Paris, in which the interesting thing in the meeting in Paris, these are recent books which talk about the growth of beyond uneconomic growth. This is a book in honor of Fest Schrift, it's called, in honor of Herman Delling. And the growth is something we produced in Barcelona, this book. So this exists. We cannot say this does not exist. Yeah, it exists in print. But, and one can read this and take positions, but not to assume that this does not exist. I mean, it exists, this kind of debate. And it not only exists now, but it has existed since 40 years ago. In this occasion, when André Gortz said décroissance, and he asked himself, can capitalism survive without economic growth? And then he said, well, I don't know, perhaps yes, with a new sector of the economy, a green sector, could survive perhaps capitalism. This was debates in 71, 72, after they read the Meadows report. And Sico Mansholt was a Dutch who became president of the European Commission. Well, I know that there have been all kinds of presidents of the European Commission, and let's say Jacques Delors, good person, isn't it? And then, of course, other people who are not so admirable, like the previous to the present one, who is now going to work for Goldman Sachs. So I don't admire all presidents of the European Commission, and the 70s was not an important position in the political hierarchy, perhaps. But it's interesting that Sico Mansholt, who had been Commissioner for Agriculture, had built up this mountain of butter, isn't it? Because of subsidies, he repented. He changed his view totally after reading the Meadows report. And I have no time to go through all his detailed proposals at the time that he put forward in a letter to Franco Malfatti before he came for 10 months the president of the Commission. So he knew very well Petra Kelly, who is an interesting side event in a way, because Petra Kelly became so important in the German Green Party, but of course she was much younger, because Mansholt was from the older generation. He had been in the resistance to the Nazis in the war period, and then was Minister of Agriculture in the Netherlands. Anyway, this I have explained. And he promoted in these interviews in 71, 72, this idea of below zero growth. In fact, he said in French, croissance au-dessous de zéro, very explicitly. He also was very worried about population growth in the world, of course, with reason at the time. And he made some political proposals. The political proposals are here somewhere. And one thing that he would have liked, although he didn't say, would be this unconditional income, which is something invented very near Brussels, because the main spokesman for this is Philippe van Parijs, you say, which is from Leuven, or Leuven. And because if the economy does not grow, then the unemployment is going to increase, so we need some policy proposals. Mansholt talked about, he said, not le produit national brut, but le bonheur national brut. Brut is a joke, but bonheur, happiness instead of GDP. Well, there is now a lot of work about this. When GDP goes up per capita, does happiness increase? We call it life satisfaction, and there are many reports with different results about this. So this was already, I think it came from Tim Bergen in the Netherlands, this idea already then of talking about bonheur, the happiness, being more important than this. And then I think, and I'm finishing, that the Greens should support also, I know that there are enough things in Europe and complicated stuff, and for instance, I have nothing here about alternative money or other things that you are going to discuss later today and in the afternoon. But the Green movement is not a European movement, although politically, of course, and of course some Green parties like in Mexico are totally disgraced, isn't it? So the word green is available for anybody in the world, and it's very difficult to say which is the real green line. But I think if we look a little at the history, anti-nuclear clearly, then we look at the Ende Gelände and the unburnable fuels and the preoccupation with climate change. I remember the German Greens in 1990, in the elections, they made a mistake, I think, because they said we are not for reunification, and they lost many votes in the East also. But they said we are for discussing climate change in 1990. And said, yes, they are right, but many people did not understand what they were talking about. So politicians should not always think that they have to talk about things that people understand yet. I think politicians should teach people about the ideas that are going to come later. And in the European context, we cannot be other thing that international, isn't it? I was sleeping yesterday in a place near here, which is called Hotel des Colonies, here in Brussels, the Hotel of the Colonies. And this is a historical hotel, they said, because they get another name, but then King Leopold came and went to Congo. So we built this hotel, which is a historical hotel from 110 years ago. So if we are European, from wherever we are, we have this more or less colonialist background, isn't it? So we should be concerned about the world in general, or countries that, well, yeah, all countries either had colonies or wanted to have colonies, as the Germans. So I think that there is a need for support for environmental defenders around the world, and then we have to be worried about population and also about migration, especially a day like today, that there is this referendum in Hungary. One thing that Europeans did well, I think, 100 years ago, 120 years ago, was to worry about population growth, but more about population growth, about the freedom of women to choose the number of children they wanted to have. And this was something won by the people, not won by the Catholic Church, for instance, isn't it? Or by the states. The states, until not so long ago, in history, wanted more people to have more soldiers in France to fight the soldiers from Germany and so on. And all the right-wing regimes like Mussolini or Franco or Petain or you know whom in Germany wanted to have more children, of the right color perhaps, but more children, isn't it? Even sometimes people say more children to pay the pensions. Which is a bit silly, isn't it? Because more people to pay the pensions means more people to pay the pensions of the people who have been born. It's totally. So if Cochet, which is one of us, as a French, he invented this idea based on these old debates on la grève du troisième enfant, he always said, that 2 children were enough per person or per woman. So this is a good book, a very good book, but what I like is the cover of the book, in which these women who could be Madeleine Pelletier, Nelly Russell, one of these women going to jail because they were preaching these doctrines, is here being blamed by priests, by judges, by lawyers, by politicians of the right, I suppose, and so on. So this is something that has been a European social success, I think, and has to do, but this is still not a fight or a struggle won everywhere. But the fact is that population is not growing so much. In the last century, it grew 4 times, and in this century, it's going to grow only about 30%, and then stop population growth, I think, because I read things about these topics. So it's not just that I want it to happen. I think it's something that is happening. And this links with, and this is the last one, with the issue of migration. And here, I was impressed in Budapest in this conference because a colleague of mine, a very good friend, Georgios Kallis, who knows the Greek islands and knows Lesbos before and after, and knows what is happening there with migration, he discussed in a conference of the growth on ecological economics what somebody called Garrett Hardin had written in 1974, somebody, a biologist living in California, and said so many immigrants are coming to California, so we should adopt an ethics of the lifeboat ethics. I knew him in person, but he died 20 years ago perhaps. And he was really a biologist and not very humanistic in a way. And this is what he said. And he has a whole article which is in this journal which is called Psychology Today. So this is, well, it could be, if I don't know whether Madame Le Pen writes articles in academic journals, but perhaps this would be something that one could read from the right wing in Europe today, isn't it? Well, the fact is the lifeboats are trying, well, people are drowning. It's happening in a way. We are in the lifeboat and we say, you go back to the sea and drown. Oh, not all of them, but many of them. So when Giorgio Scali is now in Budapest a few weeks ago, he was discussing this. He, on the spur of the moment, he invented a slogan. And he said, the earth is our common lifeboat. And I think it's a very good slogan, which I make my own, because we are all inhabitants of the earth. Of course, things can be rearranged. And for instance, I am in favor of Catalan independence. But I mean, what it means independence? Well, I mean, doesn't mean very much, in fact, because we're going to be in Europe. But it's not mean, but are we going to have 10 million refugees? Well, I don't think we want 10 million refugees. So there are many practical things here. I understand this very well. Many practical things. But the principle should be that the earth is our common lifeboat, I think, of free migration as a right, and then rights have rules, but for application. And I think there is something that you either take one position or you take the other position. You cannot be in the middle and say, I don't want to see what is happening. What is happening is something that is due to, I don't think it's due to climate change mostly. I think it's due to the wars in Syria, obviously, but also because the difference in income is becoming larger in the world, between the north and the south, between the rich and the poor in each country. And there is a moment when people make a choice and say, we, as any of us would do, and say, the lottery is, the chance is not very large, but if we get through, my life might be much better. And it becomes like a mass movement. This has been going in my book of 86. I am happy to say, and this is my late phrase, that I had a footnote because I was writing the book, and suddenly there was news in the newspaper that some people coming from Morocco to Spain had been drowned, like 30 people drowned. And it was one of the first times that I read this, 86. And I said, well, this is going to continue, and this is because of this. There are no you are thermodynamics, isn't it? There is not Maxwell's demons at the borders. Maxwell demon was a kind of invention in theoretical physics of how to separate the molecules cold and warm in two gases, so that there will be, you have an opening and you close it up, so that when the cold one is moving to the warm, when logically you would have equal temperature after a while with a little opening. And the demon was opening and closing this. Anyway, that's the physics of parallel to this. And so at the borders now, we have terrible Maxwell demons who allow us with the appropriate passport to go to Morocco or to India, wherever we want, and people from India or from Morocco or from Pakistan cannot come here. It's very difficult to get visas. You all know this, because even when we want to have conferences in Europe, it's very hard to invite people from some countries to come to our conferences. So we are becoming, well, living in a lifeboat ethic, which is not a very nice life to live, isn't it? So I want to make this political statement about the earth is our common lifeboat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joan. Actually, I'm just looking at my schedule. Well, this is now the time of the coffee break, so we will not have time for questions, but then you grab Joan by the arm and you ask him questions over coffee. Joan, I think that you ended with the key questions, and that goes way beyond the economy. The question is, are we in a mode of you're on your own, or are we in a mode of we're in this together? And well, you pleaded very eloquently for the we're in this together, and I do believe that the Greens are the party of the we are in this together. And it's not we against them, it is all of us on this lifeboat, or I call it spaceship Earth, because we have no alternative. Now, I don't know, if aliens come, should we push back? That is another question, but well, maybe for the next Congress of the Green Parties. Just I want to tell you that the Global Greens are going to meet for the first time in Europe next year, and that's going to be in Manchester, if I'm not... Liverpool, voilà, je me trompe toujours. Next year, so we have had the Global Green Congresses in Africa, in Latin America, in Australia, and now it's going to be Europe. So we are not forgetting that we are a globalist family. So you see the challenge. How now do we green our economy, taking this into account? So it's about systemic change. It's not about just greening the current model. Another piece of advertising before I get you to the coffee. You ended with this issue of migration. Those of you who live in Brussels are warmly invited 2 weeks from now, on the 16th of October. Ecolo will reopen the debate. We do not accept that there's only one common wisdom, and that is the lifeboat theory. It's us, and then we push back, because this is becoming basically a hegemonic way of thinking. I mean, when you look at the way the European Commission, by the voice of Timmermans, defines success, he says the EU-Turkey deal is a success. Why is that? Because less people are dying? Not at all, because the same number of people are dying currently, but less people arrive. This is the definition of success. And that is by a Dutch social democrat, who is number 2 of the Commission. So we do not accept that this is the only way of thinking about these things. And so we will open the debates about migration and, well, is it not after all a human right to move around? So that's a completely different topic, but maybe not so disconnected from this one. So thank you very much, Joan. I really appreciate you coming here and challenging us also, because indeed, and I'll finish there, I also hear the green growth language within our circles. I mean, when I say or, within the green family, we should always keep in mind that this is not about greening the current paradigm, it's about changing the paradigm. And that's a bit more difficult, but that's what we were born for 30, 40 years ago, and even more, actually. Thank you very much, and so have a good break. So we will distribute ourselves in the 4 meetings. I guess that the 4 meeting rooms are indicated. Yeah, okay. So, voilà. Thank you very much. Grand merci.
I think that all these debates